Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher and SENDCO myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Lynn Howell. And before I introduce her with her very impressive bio, I've known Lynn for quite a long time, haven't I, Lynn? We've known each other for a while. Yep. But this is the first time we've actually met properly. Well, not even properly.
Yeah, I think it was when we both started blogs about the same time, and we were kind of sharing each other's stuff to kind of promote each other, weren't we? So it was good collaboration.
Absolutely. So we must have known each other, like 8 years, maybe. I don't know,
maybe longer,
yeah. Quite a while, which is quite impressive that we've not actually spoken to each other properly on the screen. So yeah, this is really exciting for me. So Lynn, if you don't know her, Lynn Howell is an accomplished SENDCO, an educational consultant and writer with over 24 years of experience in the education sector in a variety of roles, including assistant head and ITT lead mentor. She's passionate about inclusion. She specialises in helping schools create supportive environments for students with special education needs and disabilities. And Lynn is a strong advocate, as anyone who follows her on social media will know, for staff wellbeing, offering practical advice to help SENDCOs, school staff and school leaders manage stress, avoid burnout and improve work-life balance. And I imagine our listeners listen to this thinking, oh, we could do with some of help with that at the moment. So through her popular blog, which is positiveyoungmind.com, and active Facebook groups, Lynn shares relatable insights on topics such as mental health, leadership and career transitions for educators. Her writing is known for being conversational, reflective and full of practical tips from personal experience. And in addition to writing, she does a lot of stuff. Lynn hosts webinars and provides coaching for SENDCOs and school leaders, offering valuable strategies for creating inclusive, positive school cultures. Her expertise and down-to-earth approach have made her a trusted voice in education, particularly for those navigating the complexities of SEND and leadership roles. And Lynn holds an MA in Education, Fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching status, NASENCO and NPQH. As well as having her own blog, she's written for organisations including Education Support, Nexus and SEN Magazine. She's also the editor of Teach Toolkit and works with Kindness Matters, supporting kindness in schools. And she has several books available on the topic of SEND and SENCOing, which I think should be a verb. That's brilliant. And she's also a children's author. A lot of people listening to this are going to be thinking, how on earth have you managed to do all of these things, Lynn? It's quite impressive.
I'm quite old, that's how.
Well, they can see your face, so they know that's not true as well. So she's just a very busy lady.
Yeah, wrong side of 40, or the right side, if that's where you think life starts. So.
Oh, I love it. So tell us, you're obviously very passionate about SEND. I've known that for a while, but where did this come from? Why are you passionate about supporting children and young people with special education needs and disabilities?
Well, I think it's come from a very long career of frustration, definitely, in not providing all that we could for children in our schools. And I've seen the change in education back when I qualified in 2001. And it was the case where if you could control your class, you're kind of 3/4 of the way there and no one really cared about anything else. So moving on to sort of the more complex needs. And, if I look back at myself as a beginning teacher and some of the things, I know probably some of the older generation of teachers listening probably relate to this. Some of the things I used to say to children because I thought that it was the right thing to say, because that was what my role models were saying. It just wasn't ideal to support children with SCMH and SEND needs. So it was that whole, why haven't you listened the first time? I've said it twice already, sort of ringing in my ears. And I always sort of think back to that and how I was when I started teaching, and how that's evolved to be a lot more child-centered. So yeah, I mean, through various life experiences, horrible school experiences, etc. I got my MPQH and I really wanted to be a head, and I decided though it was going to be either up or out. So becoming a single parent meant I couldn't really juggle both camps, because flexible working as a head teacher is not as as usual as it should be, and I think that it really needs to improve for females like me, particularly males as well if they want to work part-time, but definitely for more flexible leadership positions I think you'd get a much higher quality of leader in some cases. So that's something for people to look into. But I think because I decided to come out and focus on the well-being and the Senkoing, and I've just meant that actually I've been able to influence a wider range of people than I ever would have done as a head teacher. So I think the situation has definitely been great, and I'm never a dull moment because it's never the same day twice. And I really enjoy producing webinars and making PowerPoints. I always have done. So so yeah, we'll see where I end up. I don't know what's next
Brilliant.
really.
I love it. And I can tell that your job is very varied from what we've listed and what we've gone through and what you're doing.
Definitely.
It's
And I am
really,
a realist because I know there's a lot of groups out there who are very solution focused, etc., and they're not very keen on realism because they think,
mm,
oh, we need to make the best of the situation. But my Sweary Senko Facebook group, it was kind of born because I just really wanted people to be able to let out the frustrations in a safe space. So
yeah.
that's had a huge impact.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. So you're a Senko yourself, and you've written, I love your book, your most recent book, Starting Out as a Primary Senko. Really, really good book. What are the highlights then for you of being a Senko? And this one might be easier to answer. What are the challenges at the moment that Senkos are facing? And I imagine you've got loads from your Facebook group that you could
Definitely.
list.
I mean, I need to keep it a balanced.
Yeah, keep it balanced. We want to know some
Highlights.
highlights. Tell us, because we do want people to become Senkos as well. So tell us,
Absolutely. I mean,
why should they do it?
the highlights then. So if you're in the right school, it is the best job in the school, in my opinion, because having that, I've had a broad experience of classroom teaching, but be able to step out of that and have a more of a whole school holistic view is
Yeah.
fantastic. Senkos are quite often part-time, so in terms of work-life balance, it should in inverted commas, should be better. Although I know that there are people who end up working on their days off, as I've done in the past. So, and just having that impact on individual children is gold really, because although as a class teacher you have sort of 30 children in the class and you make some sort of impact across the year, but to get that child's EHCP to secure
Yeah.
their secondary placement, things like that, it's just absolutely amazing. And you have really made a difference to those children.
Yeah,
And
no, I
on
would
the other
agree with
side of
that.
it,
Can
with
I just point
that,
out that I'm not sure I agree with parts of your answer. I'm not sure I agree with work-life balance. The amount of hours I worked as a Senko, I
that's
definitely
it
didn't
by
get
the
that in my
side, isn't
school.
it?
But the bit about making a difference, completely agree with that. I remember
Yeah.
getting a child into a specialist setting, and that was the right place for them, and they really needed that, and that was a real, yeah, a real positive moment. And like you say, you feel like you've made a real impact on someone's life that way, don't you?
Definitely. And the work-life balance is aspirational because technically if you work one day a week, as I do in a school, then that should be it really. However, I think, there it's about setting your personal boundaries, isn't it? I know we're all rubbish at
Yeah.
that and I'm rubbish at that as well, but definitely in comparison to sort of being in a school full time, sort of having the best of both is quite nice. And some people Senko in two different schools so that they can sort of leave one and then start another one, and they find that they take less home with them overall than the
Yeah.
expectations if they're in a school full time. So that's another
I met
thing to
someone last
consider.
week who was Senkoing she was Senko across 8 schools.
Ooh. Is that in a trust? I guess if it's in a
Yeah,
trust,
it was
they always
across
want a
the
piece
trust.
of you. So that
Yeah,
that's
I was in
crazy.
awe of her.
Wow. Okay. Does she sleep? I mean,
I don't get a chance to ask her. It was at a conference. I didn't get a chance to ask her, but I imagine not.
well, I mean, that brings us on to the downsides, doesn't it? Because no one really understands your role. I
Yeah.
think some people think that you sit in your office and say and you're playing sort of. I used to say solitaire on the laptop, but it's not that anymore. Probably Candy Crush on your phone or something. But I think that the behind the scenes role of a Senko
Yeah.
is massive, and people don't really understand it. And there's a massive overlap, isn't there, as to what the Senko role is versus what school teacher role is. So it's like I know of Senkos that have been responsible for the whole of teaching and learning in their school and improving everything, but actually it's a whole SLT issue. You've got the LA battles of trying to get the right funding for children, and there's just no time and high expectations. And I really think that it's definitely the climate of the school which is the main factor, and the grass may be greener somewhere else. So I always encourage people before they quit education altogether, just do just to see if it is better somewhere else, because it might just be a change of scene is what is needed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. So in your book, you write about everyday life as a Senko. How would you describe, like you're saying, lots of people don't understand what the role is. I think even some head teachers don't fully understand what their Senko is doing, and no disrespect to them, but I think it is a difficult one unless you've done it to know what it's actually like being a Senko. So how would you describe sort of the day-to-day role of a Senko? And what do you think other teachers, parents aren't aware of in particular, or the head teachers, SLT, what do you think they're not aware of that is fundamental to the Senko role that you wish they would know we're doing?
That also links to my next book for Bloomsbury, which is Send for School Leaders. So
Ah,
I've got a whole section in that on what your Senko wants your head teacher to know, because
oh,
there's an
brilliant.
awful lot of misconceptions. So for those of you actually watching, here is the book. So I'm just going to refer to the book for some of those. I've got a whole section on the first year of Senkoing, because it is never the same day twice, and you know, go exhausted at the end of the day, and you've because you're not bound by sort of lunch times as much, you kind of forget to eat and things as well. So that's important to remember, to eat and drink throughout the day. But just to go through the sorts of things like in your first year that you might come across. So I've got sort of first day to start with. So meeting the children on the register, checking provision, meeting your line manager, finding out all the new things about the school, and not forgetting to breathe deeply in between all those things, definitely. Then we've got first week, introducing yourself to parents and building those relationships, and learning walks, and just making sure you've got all those diary dates sorted, working out where all the files are, checking out what interventions are happening. And we've got in the first month more learning walks, training needs for staff, access arrangements, checking up with key external people for individual children, and working out your IEPs or one plan deadlines and things, and setting up meetings for those if needed. In first term, you'd be thinking about triangulating your safeguarding or SEMH and behaviour, reviewing your IEPs and one plans, staff meeting slots as well for training staff, updating or starting your action plan, because no doubt there's all sorts of whole school things to do, reviewing your interventions, and then we've got data reviews, pupil well-being, finding out your school priorities and working on those, EHCPs, annual reviews as well, and just sorting out what established systems are already in place and finding out a bit more about those. And then you've got further monitoring, you've got cluster meetings, assessment tracking, and you've got liaising with your line manager, because they sometimes don't actually know what you're doing and they leave you to it, and you think, well, I really ought to tell somebody what I'm doing. And then you've got reporting to governors, transitions to other schools, screening of new pupils and current pupils, supporting teachers in class, monitoring your own workload. That's really important. And sorting out your own CPD needs, and supporting behaviour and SEMH for individuals, and also reports for NHS, things like that, EHCP applications, supporting concerned children. And there's always one down the field or in the toilet that takes up your time. So, so not busy enough, you'll get a curveball now and
I was
again.
just going to say, even if you've got all of those planned out, and that's a really good explanation of what you've got to do, is it's really useful because there is so much. Even if you've got it all planned out, there's a phone call, there's a knock on your office door, there's somebody pulling you out of a lesson that needs some support, isn't there? There's always something different. And I think that's what
Absolutely.
people don't see is the back. They think it's just that, and they don't see the background, all of that stuff you've explained that you've got to do
Yeah.
behind the scenes
Three
as
or
well.
four family, depending on your size of school, three or four families will take up sort of 60% of your time,
Yeah,
probably. So depending on needs, but it's yeah. And sometimes it's a thankless task. So it's always like the in a theatre, you are the stage lighting,
yeah.
and no one really notices sometimes until it all goes a bit wrong. So
I love that. So, one of the things I was going to ask you that's in your book as well is about graduated approach and when it's used effectively and when it's not used effectively, because we talk a lot about it. Yeah, tell us more about the graduated approach.
So it's a very good best practice, of course, at the moment for our SEND pupils. So assess, plan, do, and review the APDR cycle. So basically, in terms of assessment, so the teachers are gaining knowledge and understanding of pupils' needs, which is really crucial for planning high quality teaching and learning, and considering and deciding on appropriate provision, considering how adjustments to teaching can lead to good outcomes and progress for pupils as well.
Yeah.
And then you've got the planning phase, so teachers gaining knowledge and understanding of which teaching approaches are most effective for the individual pupil. This happens after a detailed assessment of pupil needs is carried out by the teacher and the SENCO. So then for pupils requiring SEN support, there are two main areas of consideration: high quality teaching and targeted provision. So, for example, interventions.
Yep.
And then you've got the do section. Teachers gain understanding of effective support. The teacher has day-to-day responsibility for the learning and progress of all pupils as stated in the Code of
Which is
Practice.
important for people to
Mm-hmm.
remember as well, because I think you've spoken about that a few times on the podcast, that it is everybody's responsibility, isn't it? It's not just that percentage of children who's
Absolutely.
under the SENCO, it's everybody's
Absolutely.
responsibility to be looking
It
after.
also makes clear the role of the SENCO. And actually, that's the thing that at the start in September, I say to all the SENCOs, look, have a staff meeting, put this up on the screen, and then the teachers can count how many times that it says the word teacher.
Yeah.
Because if you do a Venn diagram of what is the SENCO responsibility and what is the teacher responsibility, there is obviously a lot of
Yeah,
overlap.
yeah.
I think some teachers are not aware of necessarily their responsibility in comparison to SENCO, because the co on the end of SEN is the coordinator bit, not the doer. So it's
Yeah.
not SENCO's responsibility to do everything. However, I mean, I've been in those classes where I've got 30 children, 15 SEN, no LSA, and I'm plate spinning, and I just need someone to come and save me. So
Yeah.
I've also
Yeah,
been
you
in
can
that
completely
situation.
see both points of view from it, can't you? Especially, we know that lots of teachers aren't getting loads of training on SEND as well. So if they're not feeling confident in their sort of skills and understanding to support children with SEND, and they know they've got someone like you in the school that's got loads of expertise, you can understand how it happens and why they're like, oh, we'll just go to Lynn and find out, and she can support us on that.
Sometimes I have to look it up myself, so I don't always know all the answers, but there's so many different things coming through, isn't there? So, just in terms of the doing, so the teachers should work carefully to plan and evaluate any targeted interventions regularly with at least a support staff or specialist teachers. Interventions should be carefully documented to aid evaluation. Good communication between parties is key, and then reviewing. Teachers gain knowledge and understanding of what interventions and quality first, high quality teaching methods secure better outcomes. Teachers are expected to review all pupils' progress formally and informally within their normal roles, which includes those children with extra needs. So, I mean, I always say to SENCOs as well that if you get your high quality first, just good teaching sorted, and actually you're kind of preventing problems before they start. So, I would say to every SENCO and leader that actually that is the key thing to do in your school, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And we've got some graduated approach resources that I will put in the notes for this from Twinkle that are really useful. But yeah, absolutely. Completely get it. It's getting that high quality teaching for all early on, isn't it? That sort of breaks down those barriers and supports everybody at the beginning. And then you're more able to support those that need it despite the high quality teaching. Um, so the next thing to look at would be an EHCP. So sometimes children might need an EHCP. How do SENCOs organise that process? Can you tell us a little bit more about the process? We've actually got some PD that people can go on about EHCPs, because I know it's a hot topic. Lots of people want to know the process, and a lot of SENCOs who are new to it, it's complicated, and it's different
Yeah.
knowing what legally you're supposed to do compared to perhaps what the local authority is telling you to do. There's a lot of complications around that, isn't there? But yeah,
Yeah.
what do SENCOs do? How do they organise this process for someone who isn't aware of it?
Well, I've had trouble myself, even with my broad amount of knowledge
Yeah,
with my local authority. So it's not even a question of knowing what to do and getting what you want and what you need, because it's still an uphill battle if you
yeah,
know what you're doing. So that is a massive problem to start with. So it's kind of a bit Russian roulette in some instances,
yeah.
unfortunately. And I do feel that if all SENCOs in all the schools started making a stand collectively, I do feel that we'd definitely get somewhere. But of course, we want to do the best we can for that people in front of us. So
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to put them in a disadvantage, even if the local authority is asking you
exactly,
to fill out certain forms that you're thinking
exactly,
legally, I don't need to fill this form out, or I don't need to be providing this certain evidence. But
yeah,
because it's best practice and they're saying it, it makes you think, well, yeah, do we really want that fight now when you've got a
absolutely.
child in the centre of this that you're trying to support?
Yep. So, I mean, the Children and Families Act is what I always go back
Yeah,
to on this, with the section 36(8), which you can, find on the internet quite easily. So the local authority must secure an EHC needs assessment for the child or young person if, after having regard to any views expressed and evidence submitted under subsection 7, the authority is of the opinion that the child or young person has or may have,
I
this is
have.
the
Yeah,
key, may have the special educational needs, and it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made for the child or young person in accordance with an EHC plan. So the
yeah,
word may means really legally everyone should be able to get an EHC needs assessment, which doesn't really do the LA any favours. And
No, exactly. But I
do
think
think
that's really important, isn't it? That they don't need a diagnosis. You don't need to know they've got SEND. It's just if they may have it, and it's those those two bits of the legal test that is really all they actually should need, isn't it, to do
absolutely.
the application?
If you stick to that, you will get what you want in the end. However, it may take 2 or 3 years. So
Yeah,
obviously, you want to speed up the process, and different LAs try and stipulate different things, and they
yeah,
will go back to the code of practice and say, well, we want X, Y, and Z from the code of practice because it says in the code of practice, but actually the law trumps the code of
yeah,
practice. So, well, you can say,
completely.
well, this, and this. But I do understand from an LA perspective that they still need to draw a line somewhere because otherwise they would be inundated. So the
Yeah,
law does not do them any favors. And I think the law probably needs to be looked at a governmental level just to alleviate some of this and just have a little bit more of a
yeah,
tighter criteria. But it is what it is at the moment. And ideally, I tell my SENCOs it shouldn't take more than an hour to do your EHCNA application because of the legal threshold. So
yeah,
really, you should get what you need just with an outline of need, etc., etc., etc. But I know and they know that actually to get anywhere, to get one that gets noticed, you have to include a lot more information. So legally, you don't have to provide it at this point, but to make it stand out, then it's easier to do it
yeah.
at
To
the
sort of back
beginning,
it up
I
and
would
say
say.
why it's meeting those two things.
So there's no expectation of spending that notional mythical £6,000. So
Hmm.
you're likely spending more than that anyway.
Exactly.
So you could put a costed provision map in because if you are at the point of EHCP application, then no doubt you are spending an awful lot of money on that pupil. And definitely, yeah, add as much evidence as you can as to what's happening over and above those sort of tier one
Yeah.
and tier two interventions. There is a mythical amount of IEPs that need submitting. They say quite often that they need 3 rounds of IEPs. Of course, this is not correct
No.
either. But I would also say that you can make the IEP cycles very short. So you can have 3 rounds of IEP cycles, 2 weeks after each other. And then within a half term, you've already got 3 IEPs. Because if the needs are changing and what you're doing is not helping, then you can just
Exactly. Why
annotate
would
there.
you be waiting that
Yeah,
long for
you
it to
wouldn't be
go
waiting
wrong?
to.
That's
So
such a good point. I think that's one that parents come up against sometimes, isn't it? You hear parents saying, "Oh, I've got to wait so long before they'll even consider an EHC process because they're going through this these cycles, and they said they've got to do 3 cycles before they can get to it." But yeah, like you said, if you don't have to do that legally, but
no,
also, like you said, if it's shorter, if the
exactly.
LA are really being tricky and you wanting to provide the evidence, give them the shorter bits. Yeah,
And yeah, don't give up is the way
yeah,
to do it as well, because it's likely the LA will say no to start with. I mean,
yeah,
even for my son, I'm through the process at the moment. So they said no, got to mediation. We sat in mediation, and I said, well, you know, and I know that the law's on my side, and I'll get what I
yeah,
want. So you might as well just do it now. It was like a 20-minute meeting. So I was like, well, you just
yeah.
need to do it. So, and they still said no. And then as soon as I applied for a tribunal, they overturned it and said, oh, okay, then we'll assess. So I think it's a question of playing their game but not giving up and sticking to your guns. And I would definitely say do not wait until year 5 to apply. You need to do it in year 3 or 4 because it could take that long at the moment to get that through. And if you're needing that for a secondary placement,
Yeah.
then it's crucial that you do it earlier, definitely. So sooner rather than later.
Do
So
you think things are going to improve, Lynn? Like I'm sorry, this is a curveball question, but we've been told by the government that send reforms are coming, the white paper's coming in late spring. Although I spoke to somebody the other day and they said they didn't say which late spring, but
this is
I
true.
think they meant this spring.
I
Um,
think there's going to be some sort of implosion just in teaching and education in general because there's going to be more bankrupt LAs, I
I
think.
know,
There's going to be recruitment and retention. It's going to be a nightmare. And
yeah,
even getting the right people in school to be one-to-one LSAs, for example, this is also a huge problem
yeah,
because it's such a specialist task, and the pay is so shocking for what some of these wonderful people are
yeah,
going to work to do every day that it's not an attractive role unless you have got a specific set of skills and have a specific personality. So
yeah.
It's,
a lot
yeah,
of
I don't
times.
understand how we're going to survive on things the way they are. And there's this, I'm on the parent forums as well for special educational needs, and it's just heartbreaking some of
It
the
is.
stories on there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Not feeling too optimistic then, eh?
no, I'm not. No, I'm not.
No. Fair enough.
I mean, there are success stories, and I think we are doing better in mainstream at supporting
Yeah.
children with moderate learning difficulties, for
Yeah.
example, because I've heard, like local to me, that a lot of the schools are going to be changing from MLD to SLD just simply because moderate can be catered for in mainstream, whereas
Mhm.
severe can't. But at the moment, there's a backlog, and lots of severe children are in mainstream because there's moderate children in the specialist school places.
Oh,
So
interesting.
okay, it's not right because ideally you'd want moderate in a moderate learning difficulty school and severe in a severe learning difficulty
Yeah.
school because they all deserve specialist school places.
Yeah.
But I think mainstream increasingly are getting better in terms of knowledge and understanding
Yeah.
of children, but they're not getting any better in terms of actually having the manpower and woman power and resources in order to
Yeah.
support. So hmm,
Yeah.
watch this space, I
Watch
think.
this space. Absolutely. So we mentioned parents a little bit, and a very, very important part of being a Senko is working closely with parents and carers. How can Senkos do this well? Because I know often they can feel like they're in the middle, they're not pleasing anybody. They've got parents who understandably are wanting the best support for their children and are finding perhaps it's not happening, and they're on waiting lists for assessments, they're not getting an EHCP, all of these problems that they're facing. And then they're also, Senkos are in the middle, aren't they? Because then they were getting pressures from teachers, pressures from
Yeah.
SLT. Yeah, how can Senkos do the bit where they're supporting parents and carers well?
It is a challenge, and one of the bugbears that I have with my local authority is they'll send out a letter to parents saying the school have not provided enough evidence, which
Yeah.
automatically makes us look terrible when it's not technically the case. So I think parental understanding of processes is really important. So
Yeah.
as a Senko, you make sure you know processes inside out yourself so that you can reassure parents that this is completely normal. And yeah, the mediation might just say no anyway, and it might go somewhere else, and it's completely normal, and this happens a lot. So any reassurance that you can give is
Yeah.
is key, and building those relationships with parents is really important. And I always go back to lockdown when I was Senkoing and having to phone parents sort of weekly rather than actually having the children in school. And the information I found out about their families just because of a weekly conversation, and we were just talking about all sorts of things. I was finding out about their babies and having sort of
Oh,
conversations about weaning and talking about the older child in secondary school, and they're telling me about their toothache and their doctor's appointments, and I'm kind of like an agony aunt, but actually just to have an insight into their lives and empathy with what they are going through with some of their children 24/7
yeah.
is a really important thing because best will in the world. I'm a busy Senko and I don't understand fully. I can't begin to understand the challenges that some of our parents are facing with our special needs children. I'll also finally state transparency between home and school because so many schools try and paper over the cracks of what they're not able to provide. So if you're not able to provide something in section F of an EHCP, you really need to be transparent about that because ultimately it's a statutory requirement. So either as a school you need to provide it or you need to go back to the LA and say we need more resources so we
Yeah.
can provide it rather than say, oh yeah, we're doing this really well when
Absolutely.
actually you're not because quite often, particularly primary children, parents are not going to get a day-to-day understanding of what their child's doing because they don't
Yeah, of course.
necessarily have the verbal skills. Some of them, like if I think about one of my children, just will disgrunt at me at the end of the day. So I don't get much out of him anyway. So if I'm sort of going, well, what interventions did you do today? I wouldn't know. So
Yeah.
it's just that side of things, isn't it? So parents wanting transparency is important, and
Yeah.
that's where having records of interventions and what's happening is really important as well. So you can actually justify where the money's being spent because a parent with an EHCP wants that money to be spent on their child,
Yeah,
rightly so, and you've got to
understandably, yeah.
justify what's being spent and transparency. So there we go, just a few a few key
Yeah.
tips for
Yeah.
parental relations.
it's really interesting as well about what you said about lockdown, because everyone talks about it negatively. And obviously, it was a very difficult time, and I'm not going to try and paper over that at all. But it's interesting what you said about how it gave you an insight more into the families and built relationships. Has it then made those relationships easier in some ways? Those parents that you spoke to on the phone?
Definitely. Well, so when they came back to school and when
Yeah,
we were all back again, it definitely made it much easier to interact with them. And I definitely had a high level of empathy for what they were going through. Particularly, had a school avoider at the time who literally
yeah.
didn't go out of their room during the whole of lockdown,
Oh,
and then had difficulty coming back into school. So just things like that, really, and just putting yourself in the parents' shoes and just
yeah,
understanding, like, if they're, if they've got difficult breakups or there's difficult family dynamics, and understanding how that's impacting the child, and they're bringing all that into school gives you more empathy for sort of what the children
yeah.
are going through
And
as
I
well.
bet from their point of view as well, just knowing they got to know you, they got to know that you would listen to them and that you were open and you were, you were happy to listen to all these different things that were happening and the whole thing around the child rather than just what was happening in school. I bet really helped and supported them, made them feel supported and more able to talk to you at the school gate or come and have a conversation with you, because you've got to remember it's difficult for parents, like even it's difficult for parents who've been SENCOs
Yeah,
and parents who are
absolutely.
SENCOs to navigate the system, to bring up problems and talk to teachers. It's nerve-wracking, isn't it? But there might be a lot of anxiety as well around those conversations and coming into school. They might have repeated them a few times in the head before they're coming in of what they want to say to you, and it becomes a bigger deal, doesn't it, when you come in? So yeah, I think there's a lot of empathy needed and a lot of understanding of where they're coming from in the background behind
Yeah,
that.
I mean, particularly a lot of these parents have not had positive school
That's
experiences
true as well.
themselves as well. So it's and being approachable is quite a key thing. And I read on a lot of forums that they can't people can't get hold of the Senko, which is fair enough. And I work one day a week on a Tuesday, and if they don't get me on a Tuesday, then it can be quite challenging for me to sort of interact with them at other times. And I sort of do stuff outside of my role, which perhaps I shouldn't, but because I want to
Yeah,
be a sort of a supportive person for that family, then that's what I choose to do. But I think also because Senkos are altruistic giving people
yeah,
generally, as a rule, then we're definitely more likely to be more approachable in that respect. But if you're in a busy secondary school and you've got, like, I don't know, 200 children on your list, it's going to be a challenge. So admin support is
yeah.
something. You can get admin support, because I say to my Senkos that you're a very expensive filer, aren't you? So
That's a very good point.
if there's somebody who can just do your filing, or shouldn't be expected to do lunchtime duties, for example, just all sorts of little things that are really, get somebody else to do that if they can, because actually then you're free to work with children, because the amount of Senkos that actually get around classes and work with children,
Yeah,
just in terms of doing those assessments, is really tricky, because you are chained to a desk. If you're not careful, you do not see daylight
yeah,
during the school day. And we all know that Senkoing is about being with the children, supporting in classes, but actually, how many of us can do that as regularly as we'd like?
yeah, absolutely. Oh, you've been a brilliant guest, Lynn. Thank you so much. I think it's been so useful for lots of people, for people who aren't SENCOs, for people who want to be a SENCO, for teachers who are SENCOs. I think for everybody to understand the role a little bit more, but also, yeah, to give a bit of reality and understanding for SENCOs who are in it at the moment and the challenges they're facing. So thank you so much. It's been really helpful.